call for a shift in U.S. policy towards the Korean Peninsula, urging U.S. dialogue for diplomatic relations with North Korea. On October 14, 2024, prominent Korean figures held a press conference via the Oh My TV YouTube channel, urging the United States to change its policy towards the Korean Peninsula. Attendees included former National Assembly members Lee Boo-young and Kwon Young-gil, Professor Kim A-young, Father Ham Se-wong, Reverend Kim Song-gun, author Wang So-kyung, Venerable Myungjin, former Chosun Ilbo journalist Shin Hung-byum, Reverend Ryu Tae-sun, former University President Kim Tae-il, and Chairman Wang Soon-shik. At this event, Reverend Ryu Tae-sun, Professor Kim A-young, former President Kim Tae-il, and Chairman Wang Soon-shik read the following statement. We urge the United States to propose dialogue for establishing diplomatic relations with North Korea. Presidential candidates Harris and Trump must respond to the request of the Korean people. The participants in this national declaration and the National Emergency Conference held a press conference to inform foreign journalists about the Korean people's concerns regarding the worsening war crisis on the Korean Peninsula. Since the Yoon Suk-yeol administration took office, the nuclear capabilities of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea (DPRK) have been strengthening daily, while mutual hostility and threats between the two Koreas have intensified, endangering peace. This peace crisis is further exacerbated by the current administration's failures in security, diplomacy, and domestic affairs. The security, diplomatic, and economic policies of the United States and Japan towards the Korean Peninsula are also escalating the crisis. The Korean people believe that the policies of the United States and Japan towards the Korean Peninsula, which historically have not respected the wishes of the peninsula's inhabitants, must now change. Elections to select leaders are ongoing or have concluded in the US and Japan. In Japan, Shigeru Ishiba has been elected as Prime Minister, and plans to dissolve the House of Representatives on October 27 for a general election. In the US, a fierce battle is unfolding between Democratic candidate Kamala Harris and Republican candidate Donald Trump. Korean citizens are focusing great attention on the US presidential election. This is because the new US president's Korean Peninsula policy, especially towards North Korea, will have a decisive impact on the present and future of the Korean people. We would like to raise four main issues. 1. We urge the U.S. to propose dialogue for establishing diplomatic relations with North Korea. Negotiations for establishing diplomatic ties should simultaneously address North Korea's security guarantees and nuclear issues. South Korea overthrew the military dictatorship through the June Democratic Uprising of 1987 and achieved a democratic constitution. Newly elected President Roh Tae-woo presented a new foreign and security policy for Korea, which had succeeded in democratization and industrialization. Just before the 1988 Seoul Olympics, it was a northern policy aligned with the emerging post-Cold War era. He proposed peaceful coexistence and exchange cooperation with North Korea. He stated that South Korea would establish relations with socialist countries, like the Soviet Union and China, and help North Korea establish diplomatic relations with countries like the US and Japan. This new policy was enthusiastically welcomed by the Korean people and the international community, expected to bring peace to the Korean Peninsula. By replacing the unstable armistice system, high-level talks between North and South Korea began, and the Inter-Korean Basic Agreement and Joint Declaration on the Denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula were concluded. U.S.-South Korea military exercises were suspended, and civilian exchanges between North and South were activated. In September 1991, following the plan for simultaneous UN membership of both Koreas and cross-recognition by the U.S., Japan, China, and Russia, both Koreas joined the UN simultaneously. China and Russia established diplomatic relations with South Korea. However, the US and Japan refused to establish diplomatic relations with North Korea. North Korea interpreted this refusal as an intention to collapse its regime and intensify its nuclear weapons development. The US strengthened its blockade and sanctions against North Korea. The survival rights and human rights of North Korean residents deteriorated, and all residents of the Korean Peninsula have suffered from the threat of war. However, U.S. blockades and sanctions failed to prevent North Korea from possessing nuclear weapons. And now, North Korea is assessed to have intercontinental ballistic missiles capable of attacking the U.S. mainland and submarine-launched ballistic missiles. The U.S. policy of refusing diplomatic relations and imposing blockades has led to these disastrous results. The U.S. must acknowledge that its policy towards the Korean Peninsula, especially towards North Korea, has critically failed. The new U.S. president, elected this November, should declare that they will return to the first step of failure and begin negotiations for diplomatic relations with North Korea. Of course, the South Korean government, ruling and opposition parties, and civil society at the time cannot be free from responsibility for failing to prevent the U.S. and Japan's refusal of cross-recognition in 1991. This is why we are holding this press conference today. Additionally, North Korea's nuclear armament is providing a pretext for South Korea and Japan's attempts at nuclear armament. If not only North Korea, but also South Korea, Japan, and even Taiwan end up possessing nuclear weapons, the nuclear non-proliferation regime will be nullified. Public opinion in South Korea supporting nuclear armament has reached 70%. And some Korean politicians have already begun to incite this sentiment. Rafael Grossi, Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, referred to North Korea as a de facto nuclear weapons state, and urged diplomacy to manage the North Korean nuclear threat. He questioned whether suspending dialogue with North Korea has solved any problems surrounding its nuclear program, or whether it has rather exacerbated the situation to an uncontrollable state. Both parties in the U.S. presidential election should take these facts seriously. We request that candidates Kamala Harris and Donald Trump actively consider and respond to our proposal to the pursuit of a U.S.-Japan-Korea military alliance, which will likely face strong resistance from the Korean public. Currently, there is significant criticism in Korean society against the Yoon administration's aggressive, pro-Japan policies across political, social, cultural, and historical spheres. Public opinion in Korea is strongly against a military alliance with Japan. As agreed at the 2023 Camp David Trilateral Summit, to many Koreans, strengthening the U.S.-Japan-Korea military alliance appears to satisfy the desires of Japanese far-right conservative forces seeking to re-establish a military presence on the Korean Peninsula. The Yoon administration's blatant pro-Japan policies, without justly resolving historical issues between Korea and Japan, are facing nationwide resistance across regions, generations, classes, genders, and political leanings. The growing crisis of the Yoon administration may inevitably lead to resentment towards the U.S. and Japan if the U.S. and Japan continue to push for a trilateral military alliance. With their characteristically high-handed and great power-oriented approach, combined with dissatisfaction over the Yoon administration's political, economic, and social incompetence, civil unrest similar to 2016 to 2017 may be unavoidable. Rather than pursuing a U.S.-Japan-Korea military alliance on the Korean Peninsula, based on the Indo-Pacific strategy proposed by Japanese far-right forces, a new approach through diplomatic negotiations with North Korea could gain greater support from both Korean Peninsula residents and the international community. 3. The recent addition of Germany, a NATO member, to the United Nations Command (UNC) has heightened tensions on the Korean Peninsula. While the UNC played a significant role in the Korean War under U.S. command following UN Security Council resolutions, its continued existence long after the war has become an obstacle to peace, contrary to its original purpose. The UNC has used its jurisdiction over the southern part of the DMZ to control and hinder inter-Korean dialogue and exchanges. It was the UNC that blocked the promised railway connections agreed upon in the 2018 Panmunjom Declaration. Therefore, we pose the following questions to UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres as the UNCAUN subsidiary. organization or an autonomous body of the U.S. and its constituents? If it is a UN subsidiary, have UNC decisions blocking inter-Korean joint activities, such as joint railway inspections, been made by the UN until now? If not, shouldn't the use of the UN name be prohibited? Shouldn't it be officially declared that it is an organization unrelated to the UN? We urge the UN to dismantle the UNC military organization and facilitate peace negotiations, in line with its founding purpose of world peace. 4. We will continue to uphold the dream of unification, even in the worst inter-Korean relations. The key is to develop and implement realistic peaceful coexistence plans. President Yoon Suk-yeol has been dismissing the hard-won efforts for reconciliation and peace as fake peace, while advocating for peace through strength. He is calling for unification through force, even at the risk of war. Chairman Kim Jong-un, at the Workers' Party plenary meeting last year, claimed that inter-Korean relations have become completely fixed as hostile relations between two states, akin to two belligerent states at war. He declared a departure from the legacy of pursuing national unification through confederation or federation, rejecting the policies of previous generations. A former presidential chief of staff in South Korea argued that the two nations and two states have settled in and that living this way is natural, suggesting that an opportunity to discuss reunification may come again after a long time. The positions of the ruling elites on both sides cannot be said to represent the people, who have endured foreign invasions and internal oppression for many years. South Korean civil society, which has been engaged in pro-democracy and peaceful unification movements, feels an even greater sense of calling to achieve the unity of the nation and people, inheriting the independence and national liberation movements. What the entire population of the Korean Peninsula desires is peace and prosperity for both the South and the North, and maintaining the aspiration for unity. As we argue, the establishment of normal diplomatic relations between the U.S., Japan, and North Korea would mean international recognition of one nation and two states on the Korean Peninsula. South Korea and North Korea would also establish official diplomatic relations. Ultimately, this signifies entering an important, intermediate stage of peaceful coexistence toward becoming one. We demand understanding and support from the international community, including the US and China, for a solution of coexistence, rather than a military resolution for peace on the Korean Peninsula. We learn from our ancestors like An Young-jun, Hong Bom-do, Lee Ho-young, and Yo Un-hung the steadfast belief that this era of a divided nation and foreign turmoil is but a passing moment. The Korean Peninsula was the biggest victim of the Cold War in the past, and is now becoming a dangerous powder keg in the new geopolitical confrontation between the US and China, the new East and West. We express our earnest desire that this should not be the case. As a nation that achieved democratization and industrialization faster than any other formerly colonized people, we will realize the remaining task of peace. We will also engage in the struggle to achieve peace. We demand active understanding and support from the international community, including the US and China. October 14, 2024.